Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader Podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I'm on with Jesse Allen, and I'm excited to get into this. It's a little bit different vibe because we're getting into some farm broadcasting today. He is what do we call this? The National Content Director and host of Agriculture of America and Market Talk, lives in Nashville. Jesse, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Mark, thank you so much for the invite and having me. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Glad to get into this. So I'm gonna give you the first question everybody gets right off the top, man. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
I think, and it's one of those things I had to really think about this to be intentional. I think in terms of what I do with ag media, I think just being present in the moment and
Mm,
making sure I deliver for farmers and ranchers who are listening to our product every day. And with that, it's always been my job to report the stories and make sure I'm telling the story of agriculture. And as I was thinking, before we talked and being intentional, I always want to make sure I am doing the best possible job I can. I don't always get it right, but I
mm,
want to make sure that I'm providing all sides of something and making sure that I essentially, I'm an ex-football player, to use the old football term, leave it all on the field.
mhm.
Um, that's kind of my goal as I approach each and every day, is just making sure that I am staying focused and reporting the issues of the day and telling the story of agriculture, because agriculture in the US, I mean, our farmers and ranchers and agribusiness and more has a very great story to tell, Mark, as I know you're fully aware.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super interesting. I don't think a lot of people probably think about your role from that perspective, right? I mean, we look forward
Yeah.
to the reports or we look forward to the information. It doesn't always have, it's not a huge long shelf life, right? I mean, you're very much like sort of day to day, that because everything's shifting and cycling every day. Yeah, so it's interesting to sit and think about, like, wow, like that's actually really important, because what people hear from you is impactful because it is on such a broad-based communications platform. You're on many radio stations, you're on Sirius, you're on YouTube, you're on, I'm sure, some podcast platforms and things like
Mhm.
that. So, like, I mean, that information gets out there to a lot of people.
I've used the term before, and I just thought of this. Farm broadcasters were caretakers of the message in a way. As the news cycle continuously changes, and as I'm thinking about like agriculture of America, for instance, and all the different policy things that happen on an hourly basis, sometimes, I'm constantly, looking through my phone, looking at emails, taking, inquiries in, things like that, and trying to make sure I stay on top of things as news breaks, which is, much like traditional media, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all the big outlets, they're always staying on top of that 24/7 news cycle. Well, I
Mhm.
think farm broadcasters do as well, and we have to make sure we are sharing as much of the message out there as we can in a timely manner. And farmers and ranchers, studies have been done by the NAFB, the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, that farmers and ranchers still widely trust their farm broadcaster over, many other forms of media. We've seen a lot of those shifts and concerns in recent years, especially with the rise of social media and whatnot. But a lot of times, I think it's somewhere around three-fourths of farmer and rancher listeners still tune into their local farm broadcaster to get information, markets, news, weather, you name it. So,
And in a world with so many options in different places to get information, and let's be honest, in a world where people don't trust their media,
mhm.
somehow farm broadcasting has maintained a level of trust, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's still Tony. I don't watch Fox News or CNN or anything anymore. I did when I was a kid. I did when I was a young adult, and now I realize that it's not trustworthy. And so I go to podcasts, right? I go
Mhm.
direct. So I go to people who aren't incentivized otherwise to give me information that's not healthy for me or my family. So through all that transition over the years, yeah, I mean, farm broadcasting has maintained purity. That's cool.
It's very cool. And from my perspective too, and this kind of goes to the whole being intentional thing. I've had it happen, before. People send an email, someone is who might be disgruntled with a certain media outlet, and they hear me talk about something from one organization and they go, "Oh, this must be funded by that organization," or things like that.
Mm.
But then they might miss the next day where I report something from a competing organization. I try to be like Switzerland, and be neutral, bipartisan. It's not my job. I'm not trying to be a commentator on the issues. I'm just trying to give people the platform to talk about the issues and have that good, honest conversation that a lot of times we tend to have and need to continue to have when it comes to agriculture and probably other things in the world as well, Mark.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we have this podcast recording going on a date where you've got a market report out. I know you got an interview coming up with Secretary Vilsack in about
Yeah,
45 minutes. But so by the way, I appreciate you making time to jump in the middle of that and keeping it on.
definitely.
You really have to hold that presence and how to hold it together, kind of in the middle of so much happening in one day. And by the way, this is not a completely abnormal day. I know there's not a market report every single day, but they come
Mhm.
out sometimes a year, right? So, and
Yeah.
then there's all kinds of stuff, and that can impact. And so, to be able to stay neutral amidst all of that, and I think that's maybe the one thing that keeps it pure, right? I know a lot of the
Mhm.
podcasters that I know that I've talked to over the years um, they've managed to stay out of uh, the rat race of trying to be the one who's right, or
Yeah.
catchy headlines to get your attention to keep you sucked in. It's like, hey, this is the information. This is what's important. These are the things that farmers are making decisions on, quite frankly, on whether or not to market their grain today or not.
Mhm.
And
100%.
it's important.
It's super important, and that's what, a lot of times farmers and ranchers, and I grew up in North Central Iowa. I mean, I grew up in a small farm community. A lot of my family friends, are on the farm still, things like that. I mean, they don't necessarily the men and women who work in agriculture don't have time to have all this noise. They want to cut through the BS and they want to hear what's going on and what's important to them. And I think as leaders in agriculture, folks need to remember that
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's all about delivering the content to people and delivering the message without all the fluff around it, I guess, would be a way I would frame it up.
Yeah, yeah. What do you have any practices to help stay grounded through all this? I mean, you're man because you do this every day.
Yeah.
You got
Um,
you got a lot going on, but you got to get up every day and make content. Like I'll be honest, I do 4 podcasts on this day, uh,
mhm.
twice a month, and that's it. But it's longer form content. It's a different deal, right? So you got to get up. You got to get up and go every day.
It's, and for instance, 2-hour long, programs, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, plus different reports through the day or writing some articles. I don't do a ton of article writing, but I do some. But gathering news and looking at press releases and things like that. I guess at the end of the day, I just sometimes stop and remind myself that not everything needs to be done. You don't need to be first all the time when it comes to news reporting. You need to be right. And you also need to make sure I try to make sure that I check any of my personal beliefs at the door for before I crack open a microphone.
Mhm.
It's just about stay the course, report the issues. I learned this from a couple of the first gentlemen I worked with in radio right out of college. Young kid, didn't know anything. Someone who's radio announcer for going on 50 years at one radio station, a news reporter who's won numerous news awards in Iowa, and they kind of trained me and honed that into my brains. Like, hey, when you walk into a studio, leave your stuff at the door. You are here to provide a service and to do a job and to report the news. And I think that's what keeps me grounded. That and just, you know, keeping the perspective of, hey, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to, you know, tell the story of ag. I always come back to that, but it's so true in what I do. It's just important to me to make sure we, tell what is being done out there, especially for consumers too, who listen in a lot of times, and consumers who may not be aware that, hey, your food just doesn't appear at the grocery store. It's grown on a farm. The animals are raised on a farm, or a ranch or whatever the case is. And so sometimes I think bridging that gap too, and trying to provide some of that content so folks are more aware or more educated on what happens in agriculture. I just think at the end of the day, i- as a farm broadcaster, at least my philosophy is I check my ego at the door. I just want to do the best job I possibly can every day.
You bet. Love it. I love it. So good. What was it? What was it that got you into farm broadcasting?
A funny story. When I was in college, I went to Simpson College just south of Des Moines, Iowa. Um, Started with a music degree, ended up changing course, went into journalism. I always loved journalism. Didn't know what I was going to do. Radio seemed like a natural fit because I'm a artist and songwriter and producer too. And so experience behind a microphone. I was like, yeah, I can be in radio. I'll do something fun there. And did some internships, did one at my hometown stations in Northern Iowa, did some in Des Moines. Well, in the process of that, the farm broadcaster who was in Mason City, Iowa, had moved to the Des Moines stations where I did internship first in Mason City, then Des Moines. And he said, hey, they're still looking for a farm broadcaster back in your hometown. You should apply. And I said to him, uh, I don't know the first thing about reading markets, anything like that. Like I have the general knowledge of living in a small town and being on the farm a little bit here and there. Um,
Yep.
I don't think I could do it. Well, here we are 10, 11 years later, and look what I'm doing now. It was one of those things where it just happened to be a case they wanted someone young and they weren't concerned that I was very green. And I kind of just learned trial by fire. And it grew from there. And I did some stuff too in radio on the country side and did some morning hosting there. So that was a different outlet for me, and just one of those things, small town, rural, local radio station where you're expected to be, seven different people. That's just kind of how it all evolved. And then now I've progressed to where I'm at now in a totally different position in ag media and probably a more elevated national profile, which is still, a little weird for me to get used to, but I'm just I'm doing the best I can every day. But it was definitely wasn't the original thought process when I was coming out of college, and but I'm very happy with how things have turned out. So
Love it. Well, let's say when you're faithful with the small things, you get awarded bigger ones.
yeah, exactly. And it was one of those things too where I left Iowa during the pandemic and had always wanted to move to Nashville, Tennessee to pursue my music aspirations, and still am. It just worked out where my current company needed someone. Remote work became very hot during the pandemic, as I'm sure everyone is aware, and
Yeah.
it just worked out. It just the stars aligned and things have progressed
Well,
naturally since I joined them in 2020. So,
how many people does it take behind the scenes to produce the level of content that you produce?
so I think it varies, and I don't want this to sound bad in any way. But I think with all my years of experience, that has allowed me to essentially be able to be a one man band at times. Um, but I know a lot of folks, it can take two, three, four, five people to really put the amount of content together. Whereas like our team's very small. I do a lot of my content on my own.
Mm.
With I do have a great producer in our Fargo, North Dakota office that helps me with a lot of stuff, and we between team members, but we're supposed to have another member on our team there as well, and so it I guess at the end of the day, it's a very small collaboration for us, and I think for a lot of folks in farm broadcasting in particular, they tend to be a pretty small, self-contained unit when it comes to putting together content, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the bigger outlets, you know, you got multiple people there. I think it varies by organization, and
Mhm.
there's really no rhyme or reason to it, Mark.
Part of the reason I asked the question, right? Because I know most people, most smaller stations or smaller producers of content tend to either be it's them or them plus a halftime assistant
Mhm.
or somewhere that's helping out. I'm saying this from my end. I mean, I have a team member who is like, once we were done recording, like, I don't touch this. Like,
Mhm.
but you guys are taking multiple pieces of content every day, and you got to get that from a raw audio format or raw video format, push that into an actual file, upload, title, art
Mhm.
you're putting along with this stuff. I mean, there's so many steps. We have a whole documented process on the backside of our podcast production that is like multiple steps. And we've documented that because we're growing. And at some point, the person who's doing it today is not going to be the person doing it. So we're like, hey,
Yeah.
we need a smooth transition at some point. Anyway, I'm like, but it made me respect looking at the list of all the things that go into the back end of producing one of these shows. It gave me a deep respect, like, wow, like what Jesse is doing out here is there's a lot of little detailed steps. So since it's the Intentional Agribusiness Leader Podcast, right, what you guys need to know that are listening to this right now or listening to what Jesse puts out there every day is how much depth and how much detail goes into a 5-minute market report that shows up at the top of the.
Mhm. It's amazing when someone actually sits down and breaks down how much goes into it, and I think too, it helps when someone is they need to be well versed in their field in certain ways. And I know a lot of ag broadcast colleagues at different companies as well who someone's very good with policy. So they could easily craft a policy story or take an interview with a senator and narrow that down very quickly. And then you have someone who's very versed in markets and can read that 5-minute market report without much preparation. Like, you know, could take a look at the markets and see that, oh, we're down 10 cents in soybeans. Okay, what's going on there? And figure it out real quick and make it make sense for the listener. Um, Editing, you know, the news services come in handy at times, you know, like the NAFB or Associated Press, things like that. That helps with content and gathering and sometimes cutting down audio, but a lot of times there's that you are on a media call and you have to take a 45-minute interview with Secretary Vilsack and turn it into a 2-minute newscast. So, yeah, to your point, there is a lot that happens behind the scenes. Some people are very good at just doing it on their own and getting it done and cranking out as much content in a quick fashion. And then there's other people who lean more on a little bit of a team. And either way, every way works at the end of the day. But there's a lot that goes into it behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to bring that up because I think most people probably don't have a respect for it. I wouldn't have had the respect for it until we started producing this podcast, and it's just me and um, Zach booking people for the show and
mhm.
doing all the editing and getting it out there onto the digital platforms. I mean, there's a whole process. I know people probably don't know this, but we have to take the audio format from this and then make sure that everything sounds good, and then upload that to and put in the intro and the outro and the little commercial that we put in the middle, and then that's got to go get uploaded to a service. And there's a whole list of things. Then it's got to go to this platform and that platform and all over the place. So there's a lot that goes into to putting these things together. And by the way, guys, like, we're only doing like 8 to 12 shows a month on our end. Jesse's out here doing a couple hours a day of content.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a lot.
And it's really changed too in the last 5 years, especially with the rise of podcasts,
Yeah.
video, social media, of course. It's not just for farm broadcasters. It's not just a matter of putting together radio reports or a TV program or whatever. A lot of times, if you're in radio, audio mediums, you're doing podcasts as well. You're doing video. I mean, I never dreamed I would be on camera doing stuff. Well, it's part of the game now. I mean, you're not a radio company, you're not a TV company, you're not a print outlet. You are a media entity in
Hmm.
2024. And that goes for all sectors. And there's a lot of companies too who I've seen who they're taking advantage of podcasting and video, and they're producing their own content to try and tell their own story. And that is great. I mean, the opportunity is out there. Take advantage of it. You and yourself and your brand, you are your own media entity, your own PR firm, you name it, whatever the case is. You have that ability and that power to do things now. And I think that's just so awesome.
This is very cool, and it's the world that we live in now. And you need to understand all the tools that are at your disposal to be able to promote yourself. Most of the
Mhm.
people that we work with in sales training they're very one dimensional. They use their phone for email, text message, and for phone calling when it comes to reaching out to customers. Man, why not create a 5 minute video show where you just hold up your phone out in the field and talk about what's going on, right? And pop that,
Exactly.
you can share that link around with 25 customers that you want to share it with. Why not? I mean, there's so many ways that you can just leverage, and that's a very simple example, but I recommend people do as much as they can. I mean, you got all the different social channels and podcast channels, et cetera. Like the world we live in today is, man, there's so many different permutations of ways that you can create cool content. But one thing I wanted to share about this, there's training I went through a while back that talks about the different there's like a hierarchy in the ways that we can create value to the world, that we can offer value to the world, right? And then the most
Mhm.
that we all start off with is our first job, picking rock or mowing lawns or doing landscaping or something. That's implementation, right? It's the doing of things.
Yep.
And then the second order of ways that we add value is through unification, where you get good enough at something that you get a team of people that do it with you, right? So now you multiply, now you get work done through others. But the third level and the third order of adding value comes when we get into communication. Because what happens when you're in communication and just trying to make a point for what we're just saying, I can go in and show you through analytics that for 650 hours last month, people listened to this show. Okay. And
Mhm.
while I was sleeping or doing something else. Right? Like we spent an hour making a show and then the team put it all out there. It takes a few hours, per episode to get it all up. But man, like that thing's out there. And people listen to this when we're not thinking about it.
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is, I mean, I'll post something, a video for Market Talk, for instance, in the afternoon. And by the time I wake up the next morning, it's like, oh, 400 people watched this video last night. I mean, it's the ability to consume media when it's convenient for us, I think plays such a huge role in, what we can do as agriculture leaders and more. It's like, hey, take advantage of it, because if you have good content, at some point someone's gonna listen or view it. And I think that's just the way things have changed, and that's the way they're gonna continue to progress.
100%, man. All right, let's talk just a little bit about you before we cut you loose to go talk to the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture here. What was the biggest challenge for you getting into this space?
I think initially it was making sure I learned what I needed to say, when I needed to say it, and learn the lingo and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, just making sure that I sounded like I understood what I was talking about. And I guess maybe beyond that, not sounded like, but understood what I was talking about. I think that was one of the biggest things for me. And now I feel like that has just evolved into making sure that I have the best resources around me to continue to tell a story maybe. Um, like I mentioned earlier, so much has shifted in media now and podcasts and video and things like that. Making sure that myself and our team, for that matter, is set up for success. We're using the best technology we can. We're using the best practices. We have the best strategy we can in terms of what we're putting out there for content and things like that. So I think the biggest things for me was just was initially getting the green, off of my hands, so to speak, and getting into knowing more about what I was actually talking about, which hopefully at this point I at least have some idea. And then I think now the biggest challenge is making sure that as a company we stay efficient and making sure that the broadcasters who I oversee stay efficient and make sure that at the end of the day, we're sharing content and stories that really farmers and ranchers care about. I think that's the biggest challenge is now as well moving forward.
Good stuff, man. When you're not producing content, what are you reading? What are you listening to?
I've never been much of a reader. I think high school really kind of drained me for reading. I was just had to read so much, and um, so I don't read a whole lot anymore. I'll read, and a lot of times too. I think the news cycle really. I have always staying up to date on reading other ag articles and things like that. So, listening though, I listen to a fair amount of podcasts. I listen to other agriculture podcasts just to kind of see who else is doing things, and what they're doing, what they're talking about to stay up to date. And then for me too, I listen to a lot of music podcasts or YouTube videos for my music stuff like that. I spend so much time and put so much effort into what I'm doing in agriculture that also like the other part of me is very much embodied in what I'm doing with songwriting and my artistry, and then also too making sure that at the end of the day my family is in there with a newborn in the house and my wife and things like that. So it's like I am trying to give every ounce of energy I can to those three things that I think are the most important to me. So, um, for me, podcasts, I'll say, it's when it comes to agriculture, just listen to as much stuff that is out there that you can find. I think consume as much as you can. Um, Beyond that, outside of agriculture, other podcasts. I mean, there was a while I got into Joe Rogan. I just found some of his long-standing conversations interesting. Well, not necessarily all the views, but just some of the guests he had on. Those were fun for me for a time. And sometimes too, I'll listen to other, like I said, music related stuff. Bobby Bones does the Bobby cast. Those are very interesting conversations outside of his radio show with country artists. So things like that. Sports, sports podcasts, pop culture, you name it. I'm a pretty laid back guy. I love agriculture. I love music, my family, and sports. I could sit here and talk sports all day, Mark. So, um,
Another
that's
show.
me in a nutshell.
Good stuff, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing the little bit of the behind the scenes in farm broadcasting and
You bet.
really what that for the show's called the Intentional Agribusiness Leader, and then I think I'm even surprised a little bit at the level of intention that's required. To be you are in a leadership role, man. You're public. You're out there. You're influencing people's decisions with the information that you put out there. And man, what could be where could intentional leadership be more important to that? More important than that? I don't know. I think this has been cool. So,
Yeah.
where do we go to find out more about you, the show, et cetera? Where would you send the listeners?
I'll point folks to a couple places. Agricultureofamerica.com is where you can find out stations that the show airs on. You can find the podcast of the radio show there, etc.
Mhm.
Markettalkag.com as well. You can, same thing. You can find our YouTube channel there. Um, audio podcast versions of the show, radio station links, etc. Those will be the two best places. And then a lot of our coverage too is on AmericanAgNetwork.com. And so 3 different ways, all of them are kinda tied together in some fashion, so you can be able to find info and details, and hear, different content we're putting out, or reach out to me if you wanna talk, have questions, things like that. I always welcome those conversations.
Good stuff, man. All right. Thank you for being on, Jesse. I appreciate it.
You bet, Mark. Thank you so much for the invite.